the diary entry and chapter 11. But yes, my children have been a little bit under the weather and night times have not been all that fun. So we're going to try for chapter 12 now. Okay, chapter 12. On Tuesday, Manny and Jared are both missing from Societal Evolution. Lunch too. Justice sees Tyler, Kyle, and Blake, who scowls at Juz but keeps his distance, huddled around a table in their senior lounge, whispering. As the day goes on, there's an ever-increasing buzz, though Justice never catches what people are murmuring because they go quiet whenever he gets too close. So when he's walking to the dorm room after classes are over and he sees the bros huddled around Jared's car without Manny, he knows something is up. Especially when Jared turns to give Juz the evil eye and Juz sees his face. Now, Juz knows he and Jared came to blows, but could he have caused that much damage? Dude looks like half his mug got attacked by a swarm of angry hornets. When he gets back to his room, Justice does the unthinkable. He calls Manny. Of course the guy doesn't answer. There's a knock at the door. Come in, Juz says, dropping down into his desk chair, as he pulls out his notebook to skim the letter he wrote. Martin after Blake's party. He hears the door open and close before the bedspread squeak. When he turns around, he almost falls out of his chair. Dog! Manny is stretched out on Justice's bed, with his hands tucked behind his head. His left hand is all taped up, and it appears one of Jared's hornets got him in the upper lip. Whoa, Juz says. Manny just stares at the ceiling. Something pops into Juz's head. Manny pushing open the passenger door of the Range Rover and telling him to get in. Hey, man, save it. I know you didn't mean it. Actually, I did, Juz says. Manny shifts his attention to Juz and lifts his eyebrows. I just didn't really consider the bigger picture, Juz said. That's what I'm apologising for. Not putting myself in your shoes or whatever. Manny turns back to the ceiling. I didn't really have your best interest in mind either, so let's call it even and move on. Juz nods. Cool. After about half a minute, the silence gets awkward. Juz cracks his knuckles. So what happened to your lip? I woke up. Okay. Juz decides to take a page from Doc's book. Care to expound a bit? Manny smiles, but then grimaces in pain. After a few seconds, he sits up and turns to face Justice. You know why I couldn't really get mad about what you said? You were right. I knew you were right the moment the words came out of your mouth. Ah, Juz says. Saturday night, I went to a festival with those clowns. 4 times, man. 4. I had to grip my teeth to keep from knocking Jared's punk ass out. Every time he made fun of somebody, it was like sandpaper being dragged over my eardrums. Dang. When he saw this black lady with 4 kids and this fool called her Shaniqua and made a joke about baby daddies, I couldn't take it anymore. Juz. I called him on it and he rolled his eyes, told me to stop being so fucking sensitive. Juz doesn't say anything. All day Sunday I sat in my basement just fuming. I think I listened to Deuce Diggs and played Medal of Honor for like 6 hours straight. The whole time, all I could think about was how I said the same thing to you, how right you were, how good of a friend you've been. All right with all that self-stuff, Manny? I'm serious, Juz. Them fools don't want to hear what they're being when they're being offensive. They couldn't care less what it's like to live in our skin. Those arseholes aren't my damn friends. Juz doesn't know what to say. Wait, yes he does. So, he gestures to Manny's right hand and busted lip. Manny smiles. This morning I went in to tell coach I quit. Huh? Dog, I hate playing basketball. Only reason I started is because you're the tall black kid at school. That's what they expect you to do. Yeah, I happen to be pretty good at it, but it's really not my thing. Okay then. Anyway, Jared was in coach's office. When I said I was quitting, he made a joke about how I couldn't until Massa set me free. I lost it. Manny falls back onto the bed. He clipped me once, but I can't even tell you how good it felt to pound that dude. Coach wanted to keep it on the low because he needs Jared to play in tomorrow's game, so he sent me home and made Jared stay in his office till school let out. Oh, damn. Manny sits back up. I just want to thank you, man. For what? For helping me get my eyes open. I didn't like what I saw, so I wanted to shut him again. But if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have known some of the stuff I've always felt around those guys is legit. Okay, you're welcome, I guess. Manny stands and opens his arms. Bring it in, fella. What? Man, get your ass up and give your boy a hug. You really creep me out sometimes, Manny, Juz says, complying. Okay, so obviously a lot to unpack there, even though it's a rather short chapter, but we see Juz and Manny's friendship rekindle. Only a word we probably use for romance, but they reconnect. We also see Manny recognise that he was probably ignoring the behaviour of his friends. And I want you to think about the fact that, when you're a teenager, and you guys are teenagers, um, it's really difficult sometimes to stand up to people and to really consider why people say the things they do and whether or not we should speak up or whether we should just keep our mouths shut. And I think that over time that can eat away at you, especially when it brings into question your own values and morals. And for Manny, he really very much felt like he wasn't being true to his heritage, he wasn't being true to his culture, he wasn't being true to himself in not being able to actually explore or challenge, his friends. So then we see him apologise to Juz. Obviously, he got into an altercation and a fight with Jared, which is, it's hard to sort of say, like, they are fighting, they're physically fighting for the injustice. But then that raises other issues around violence and those kinds of things. So there's a whole host of stuff going on here. But a really short chapter. I am going to just finish off this reading with the January 23 diary entry, and that'll take us to chapter 13. January 23. I've got a lot on my mind, Martin. Last night, Manny's dad came down to the basement in almost 4 years of hanging out at the Rivers' house. I've never seen Mr. Julian in Manny's sacred space, as he calls it. So when he dropped down between us on the sofa, it felt like a bomb was about to go off. For a good 3 minutes, it was dead silent. Then Mr. Julian sighed. I want to talk to you boys, he said. I gulped and glanced at Manny behind Mr. Julian's head. He looked hella nervous too. Sure, Dad. Mr. Julian nodded. Today I overheard an employee refer to me by a racial slur. For real? I said. Yep. White kid, few years post-undergrad. I hired him 3 months ago. Manny looked pissed. What'd he call you? Doesn't matter, son. Point is, it reminded me of your recent run-in with Jared. I spent the rest of the day wondering if you being in that situation was my fault. Huh? How the heck would it be your fault, Dad? I was wondering the same thing, Martin. There's a lot I haven't told you, Emmanuel. Mr. Julian said. Not sure if I was trying to shield you or if I hoped things were better, but it's something I've been thinking about since Justice was unfairly arrested. He turns to me. The whole incident came as a shock, right? Yeah, it did. When that happened, I kept thinking, what if that had been you, Emmanuel? I know you would have been downright mind blown, but I wouldn't have. He shook his head. That didn't sit right with me because as your father, it's something I should have prepared you for, son. And Jared saying what he said, I should have prepared you for that too. Well, no offense, Mr. Julian, I said, but my mum has been preparing me for as long as I can remember and I was still caught off guard. You were surprised by what Jared said to Manny? Not really, I said. Exactly, that's what I'm talking about. I wasn't surprised to hear that kid at the office today say what he said. There's no predicting people's actions, but you can be prepared to face certain attitudes. Perhaps if I'd been more open with my own experiences, Jared's words wouldn't have been so astonishing to Manny. Neither of us responded. Both of you know what I do for a living, he went on, but very few know my struggle to get there. It took me 4 years longer than average to secure my position because I was continuously overlooked for promotions. I worked much harder than my Caucasian colleagues, but rarely received a fraction of the recognition. Again, we kept quiet. There are still people in that office who refuse to look me in the eye, fellas. They'll show cursory respect for the sake of keeping their jobs, but a good majority of my subordinates resent having to answer to a black man. And I was reminded of that today. You fired that guy, right? Manny asked. Mr. Julian shook his head. It's not the first time it's happened, and it won't be the last. This is what I mean by preparation. Manny was livid. But Dad! The young man knows I heard what he said, and I have no doubt he'll be on his best behaviour going forward. People often learn more from getting an undeserved pass than they would from being punished. That's kind of deep, I said. He shrugged. Kill him with kindness. My point is the world is full of guys like Jared and that employee, and most of them will never change. So it's up to you fellas to push through it. Probably best not to talk with your fists in the future, he nudged Manny. But at least you have an idea of what you're up against. Try not to let it stop you from doing your best, alright? He rubbed both of our heads and got up to leave. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, Martin. Frankly, it's pretty discouraging. To think Mr. Julian had all that authority and still gets disrespected? Hearing it made me realise I still had hope that once I really achieve some things, I won't have to deal with racist BS anymore. That's obviously not the case, though, is it? What do I do with that? I have no doubt you would have done exactly what Mr. Julian did. But if it had been me, well, I punched a guy for using the N-word recently, didn't I? The conversation reminded me of something Doc asked me a few days ago. All the work I'm doing to try and get ahead in life, who am I doing it for? Better yet, what am I doing it for? To prove myself? Gain some respect? be able to shove it in the faces of people like Jared. I don't even know anymore, Martin. Side note, don't ask about SJ. Still getting cold shouldered. It's whatever. All right. Lots to unpack in that little diary entry there. So we have got the anecdotal story from Manny's dad. And we have him really struggling to, more struggling to understand why he sheltered his son from the realities of racism and, in some ways, racial profiling. He talks, obviously, about being in a really high-powered position and his subordinates still not respecting him and still resenting the fact that they have to work underneath a black man. And he says, and I think this is a great quote, I'll write it down in a second, people often learn more from getting an undeserved pass than they would from being punished. And so there's this life lesson, theme that continues to run through it. So as Juz continues to process what is going on around him, we often, he is, sorry, I'm trying to write the quote at the same time. We recognize that he is starting to realize that life isn't quite the way he thought it would be. And I think very much also that Manny himself is getting a bit of an education on the systemic racism that exists in society, in American society. And he is sort of seeing that even people who he thought were his friends actually aren't. And I think that it's, I think it's interesting because Manny is somebody who, as I said, has come from a very wealthy family. He drives a Range Rover. On paper, he looks very similar to the guys that he goes to school with, but the reality is that he is still black and he is going to experience prejudice. So we're still looking at those themes of prejudice, injustice, unfairness, and that's going to continue. I think, obviously, that's the main current that is running throughout the text, is the heart of the text, forcing people to check their privilege, evaluate their circumstances, consider whether they've played a part or have contributed to any of this type of racial profiling, and trying to understand how on earth it occurs and why it's fair or unfair. Not why racial profiling is fair, but why it's fair to question people's own understandings of race and racism and classism and disrespect and all of that. I'm going to leave it there. It is now 9:45 for me and at night, and I am going to finish off your lessons and get to bed. So I hope you are enjoying this. If you have any questions, please let me know.